Hi, everybody. My name is Jake Goldenfein. I'm an academic here at the law school and a chief investigator in the ARC Center of Excellence for Automated Decision-Making and Society. Thanks so much to the organizers for having me. It's nice to talk to this group and to hear already some really fascinating work that's happening. This is some work that has come out of the work that we've been doing as a group, and that Chris and I have tried to start writing up. And effectively, we're thinking about what it means for algorithmic management to be sort of on the regulatory agenda in its current incarnation. So a big part of what appears to be this new regulatory prerogative is around the sort of excavation of workers' data rights and the promotion of consultative mechanisms around the use of algorithmic management in workplaces. And you see this now in a variety of instruments, including like the proposed EU Platform Work Directive and elements of the AI Act. And the goal of these sort of provisions on algorithmic management is to kind of bust through the opacity of these systems and how they distribute pay and work and reputation and how they engage in disciplinary processes. Much of this discussion now is animated by questions of platform work and gig work, however. And indeed, many of the sort of algorithmic management issues that are pegged as the most egregious are very much gig work specific. They have to do with the forms of soft control necessary to play arbitrage over worker status and to conceal the ways that the mechanisms used to design markets advantage platform providers while sucking up surplus from workers and producers. But algorithmic management has been around longer than platform work, and it's increasingly pervading non-platform workplaces and non-platform sectors. And this means that there are aspects of the algorithmic management agenda that current discussions that focus on this platformed dimension kind of miss. And we suggest that exploring these gives us some beneficial perspective into understanding the likely success of regulating algorithmic management through these mainstream ideas of worker data rights and consultative mechanisms. Specifically, we suggest that while what's being proposed might tackle some of these especially pernicious elements, laws requiring more consultation, more transparency, and human oversight may leave sort of the core goals of algorithmic management, such as work atomization, de-skilling, taskification, dehumanization, and indeed intensification very much intact. And our analysis looks at a moment in time and place when algorithmic management was actually new, and we think it enables us to understand the stakes of the debate over these workplace technologies a little bit more clearly. So in this paper, we look at the introduction of what were called engineered standards into the Australian warehousing and logistics sector in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The industrial disputes that followed, and then the substantial legal response that we say both facilitated the proliferation of algorithmic management through Australian workplace and effectively eliminated the question of the content of algorithmic management from the justiciable domain of industrial relations. Effectively through the Industrial Relations Commissions in their jurisprudence prescribing that these questions be dealt with through the consultative mechanisms within workplaces and exercising from their own jurisdictional purview. So it was this industrial relations dispute, this very significant report by the New South Wales Industrial Relations Commission, and then a series of subsequent cases that effectively enshrined the legitimacy and centrality of engineered standards in workplaces. And, you know, what we find, or through like a kind of a law and political economy type lens, is that debates about algorithmic management are, of course, highly contingent on broader questions of labour law liberalisation and the scope and primacy of the managerial prerogative in any time and place. And in Australia in the 90s, through to the last case we kind of look at is 2010. This really means that questions of safety, fairness associated with algorithmic management become subordinate to questions of efficiency and extraction and workplace rationalization.
Yeah, so to give an overview of the sort of historical context. So in the late 1980s and early 1990s, several American consultancy firms were hired by the dominant players in the Australian grocery sector to develop what were called engineered standard systems as a way of transforming structure of their warehouse operation in order to realize labor efficiencies. So engineered standards consultants were employed to study, take measurements of the time workers spent performing their duties in the warehouse, generally across a span of several weeks or months. The Retail Traders Association, the umbrella organization representing the key Australian grocery retailers, described the process of deriving engineered standards in this way. So firstly, job task is defined and standardized in an effort to identify the most efficient and safest method of work. Once standardized, the job is broken up into a series of elemental tasks. Elemental times are developed by the systematic application of recognized measurement techniques. Standard times are ascribed to each elemental task in accordance with international allowances on human performance. And each job assignment is then given a projected time by the compounding of elemental tasks involved in the assignment. Oh, sorry, and then standards are tested by observation of actual times as against projected times. Further modifications to the standard work method would be derived from employee input. So you can tell, I mean, it's sort of essentially a kind of neo-Taylorist implementation of the sort of one best way of rationalizing the workplace, although albeit with some allowance for variation from employers. So engineered standards were introduced, as I said, in the early 90s in warehouses and distribution centers across Australia. But its introduction in New South Wales was the most contested and most consequential episode. In New South Wales, the local branch of the National Union of Workers, the largest union of warehouse workers in Australia, launched a highly aggressive and militant series of industrial disputes contesting its imposition. The NUW's opposition to engineered standards was essentially that the imposition of the preferred, the preferred methods reduces employees to the status of robots, and that the use of a standard time measurement increases the risk of injury and stress on individual employees as they strive to meet the standard. So in the early 90s, the New South Wales grocery industry was destabilized by a series of protracted strikes and other forms of industrial dispute. In the wake of an especially aggressive strike in April 1994 at the Franklin's warehouse at Chullora, which is where these photos are from, the Retail Traders Association sent a letter on the 14th of April to the New South Wales Minister for Industrial Relations requesting an inquiry into the use and legitimacy of engineered standards. So this set up a commission, which subsequently convened for the following 2 years, hearing submissions from workers, trade union representatives, employers, expert witnesses, such as ergonomists, industrial relations experts, so forth, and engineered standards consultants themselves. Although notably, none of the US-based consultants actually attended the commission in person. Most of them just replied to questions by fax, and some of them didn't even bother to do that. The commission delivered their report to the minister on March 26, 1996. And the overarching tenor of the report can be grasped in the following excerpt from its preamble. So, quote, "This matter of engineered standards cannot be resolved as an industrial dispute. Indeed, it is important that safety, health, and welfare issues should not become industrial disputes. Emphasis should be placed on consultation to deal with problems in such areas without resort to industrial dispute processes." So broadly, the commission affirmed employers' right to implement engineered standard systems, but advised that the use of such systems was, quote, "qualified by the necessity to ensure that such estimates are fair, equitable, and safe to the individual and take into account human variabilities as far as practicable." Now, crucially, the mechanism that the commission recommended as the means by which such qualifications were to be achieved was through processes of consultation between employers, workers, and the National Union of Workers. Consultative safety committees were recommended to be established, which would form a vehicle by which workers, through union representatives or delegates, would provide their perspectives and experience of the working environment so as to contribute to the definition of a more acceptable and sustainable regime of engineered standards.
So after this report in 1996, engineered standards proliferate throughout the logistics sector in Australia. New EB enterprise bargaining agreements embed the text from the 1996 report, noting that engineered standards are supposed to be purely aspirational, that their operation must be fair, safe, and equitable, and that workplaces must constitute consultative committees to negotiate their scope and operation. But the union involved in this industrial action, the NUW, remained militant and resisted the legitimacy of engineered standards entirely. And they took this posture into subsequent litigation, attempting to have engineered standards removed from the EBAs, but they were very clearly castigated by the Industrial Relations Commission, who reiterated that the report meant that engineered standards were not prohibited. The battle over engineered standards had been fought and lost by the union, resulting in the ability of employers to use these algorithmic management tools in various ways, including to inform worker evaluations. Eventually, the NUW varied its strategy and attempted to bring an action suggesting that the way that engineered standards were being used in particular workplaces went beyond what was permitted by the 1996 report. And the commission again clarified that the manner of engineered standard operation was beyond its purview. It was purely a matter for consultation within workplaces. So this was a very critical moment in the legal oversight of algorithmic management. The commission effectively limited its own oversight to the peripheral questions of interrogating whether a disciplinary action had been unjust, harsh, or unreasonable. And engineered standards figured into that in the sense that as long as they were not the only criteria for evaluation of workers, they were totally fine. So in that way, it bracketed the content or operation of engineered standards from its own purview and permitted engineered standards in performance evaluation. The other area where it came up was in negligence actions for workers who injured themselves, who claimed that they injured themselves in an effort to do their work faster to meet the targets set by engineered standards, right? Trying to keep up with pick rates. But in those cases, the commission made it very clear that the employer was only liable if they had explicitly endorsed the faster but less safe work processes that that workers had adopted. The legitimacy of engineered standards or the targets that were set through them were never legally questioned. They were never legally questioned, and the commission, the various, and indeed the various courts that address these questions sort of began to premise every judgment, every finding with the acknowledgement that both bosses and employers understand the centrality of engineered standards to workplaces. And then they started talking about the degree to which employees enjoy the gamification associated with engineered standards. So lots of quotes drawn out in these judgments. So, we have to understand these legal developments not sort of in isolation, but very much as contingent on one, I think, this historical thing, which was a failed idiosyncratic union strategy, but as well as a particular historical moment of workplace liberalization. There was very little appetite at this time in the mid-90s to regulate workplace surveillance that was being used in service of productivity. The sort of rhetoric was to devolve the management of these things to the industrial relations system, which was effectively to a market system of coordination. Because even the data privacy laws that existed at that time and that are again now the substance of what's being called upon, this is transparency rights, requirements of human oversight, etc., These rights, these data rights, which may have offered something to the workers, were themselves subject to a workplace exemption in Australia, a long contested but very much entrenched workplace exemption, premised on the idea that this question of data rights, data management, privacy ought to be the stuff of industrial relations negotiation and contracting rather than legislation.
Right. So I'll just wrap up because
are we out of time?
Yeah. So basically, we're fascinated by this episode because it essentially established the legal legitimacy of algorithmic management in warehouses. The commission itself, as sort of John Lund and Christopher Wright in their initial analysis of the episode pointed out that the kind of recommendations of the commission to encourage these consultative committees was probably a world first. It was a remarkable, in some ways, quite a remarkable potential mechanism for workers to contest the imposition of algorithmic management. At the same time, as Jake was saying, I can talk more, if you're interested in the question time, about the industrial relations context. The NUW, New South Wales, completely rejected consultancy outright, but also, so Jake was already alluding to, consultation itself already kind of had a kind of, there's a question as to whether consultation could ever really work as a break upon managerial prerogative or whether it rather functions as a kind of recuperation of opposition, which sort of seems, even the initial American consultants who instituted engineered standards kind of recommended some mode of consultation when introducing systems to Australian workplaces as a way of allowing workers to feel a sense of control or contribution to the workplace. So yeah, there's these kind of contested kind of accounts there. But yeah, I don't know, maybe we'll just leave it there.